Even if you know Jesus, you can have some misconceptions about Jesus. Or you might read some things into his story that sort of make it match what you want your story to be or to sound like. It's actually been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, as a student of history and a student of church history, I've seen almost every side of the political spectrum use Jesus to advance their political or their church agenda, even though Jesus clearly said, "My kingdom is not of this world." It was like that back in the day as well. After almost 3 years of hanging around Jesus, Jesus' disciples had heard and they'd seen some pretty amazing things. I mean, they'd heard Jesus preaching and teaching about God in a way that was deeply profound and yet connected with ordinary people's day-to-day lives in a way that nobody else's preaching and teaching was doing. And they'd seen Jesus do things that nobody else could do, from casting out evil spirits, to healing incurable diseases, to raising the dead, feeding thousands with a small boy's lunch, walking on water, calming storms, all sorts of things like that. And so when Jesus asked them somewhere around 3 years into their time together, "Well, who do you say that I am?" They thought they had a pretty good handle on that, thought they had it nailed. Peter, as the spokesman for the group, said, "Well, you're the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one, the promised rescuer." And that was true. And Jesus admitted as much. He said as much, but they still had no idea what Jesus had really come to do. See, they thought that Christ was as much or more a political deliverer as a spiritual deliverer. And from that perspective, the suffering and dying that Jesus was talking about made absolutely no sense to them. They also didn't know what their role in his mission would be either, again, because they grew up with the idea that when the Messiah, the Christ, came into power, that his closest associates would also get all sorts of reflected power and glory and authority, and that was them. And so the prospect of these 12 ordinary guys rising to that level, well, that's really appealing to them. And then they also didn't realize yet, I think they didn't realize that Jesus was fully and completely God, even after all the things that they'd seen. See, they also grew up with the idea that the Christ was going to be a specially empowered man, kind of like Moses or Elijah, someone who had a special in with God, someone who could do signs and wonders and miracles that nobody else could do, but still a man, just like everybody else. And none of those conceptions were right. So what Jesus does is he invites Peter, James, and John up a mountain to get some more clarity on those things. Let's look in on the story. Mark chapter 9.
After 6 days, Jesus took only Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain where they could be alone. Jesus' appearance changed in front of them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone on earth could bleach them. Then Elijah and Moses appeared to them and were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good that we're here. Let's put up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Peter didn't know how to respond. He and the others were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them. A voice came out of the cloud and said, "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." Suddenly, as they looked around, they saw no one with them but Jesus. On their way down the mountain, Jesus ordered them not to tell anyone what they had seen. They were to wait until the Son of Man had come back to life.
So there are all sorts of things going on up there in that event on the mountain that would tell Peter, James, and John, there's God stuff going on here on the mountain. And that's intentional. right? Because God wants everything from that setting to scream, Jesus is God. So just look at the details for a minute. There's the change in Jesus' appearance. Mark writes again, his clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone on earth could bleach them. And dazzling white there means that Jesus' clothes started glowing, started shining brightly, like Jesus is suddenly enveloped in this brilliant light. And in the context of the Old Testament, brilliant light is significant because in the Old Testament there, brilliant light was a sign of the glory of God, of the presence of God showing up as a bright light or a blazing bright pillar of fire. And then it happened on a mountain. And again, as they're seeing Jesus' appearance change, Peter, James, and John are probably remembering that these big revelations of God's presence in the Old Testament had always happened on mountains. Like when Moses saw God in the burning bush on a mountain, or again, when God appeared to Moses on Mount Sinai. Or when God appeared to Elijah on Mount Horeb and gave him a special vision of his presence. So that's again screaming, this is a God thing. And then there's that Moses and Elijah. All right, Moses and Elijah show up, and both had in their lifetimes, as I just referred to, had these special revelations or of the glory of God, the presence of God. And here they are. The two greatest Old Testament prophets who they're talking to Jesus, and they had been in heaven for a long time. More hints to Peter, James, and John that this is a God event. And that's the point that Jesus is making here. I mean, what he's saying is, I'm more than your friend. I'm more than your good buddy. I'm more than a good teacher. I'm more than your example. This is God stuff, right? This God stuff that you read about in the Bible, well, that's what I want you to see here. Jesus is saying, I am God. And that's the same point Mark is making to his first readers who are living in a world where evil is advancing. The Roman emperor is saying that he's a god, or at least he's acting like it. And the authorities are using their power to try to suppress and even stamp out Christians. And when that's what you're seeing or that's what you're living, you want there to be something more. You want there to be the power and authority that can overrule that authority. And that's what we're seeing here. Jesus is God. And as God, all glory and power and honor and authority ultimately belong to him. Now, before we go on in this conversation, stop and think for a moment about how that connects with your life. In the world that you live in right now, why is it important for you to see those same things about Jesus? Hit pause and think about that for a few moments before going on in this conversation. So up there on the mountain, Peter, James, and John are starting to see Jesus on a whole other level than they thought. They're starting to say not just close to God, but we saw the glory of God face to face. If this is true, they're like, wow, Jesus is God. But while Peter, James, and John got a glimpse of that glory of God there on the mountain, once again, they kind of misunderstood the purpose of the glimpse of glory that they got. Let me read to you again what Mark wrote. Verse 5, Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good that we're here. Let's put up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. It's good that we're here. In this Hall of Fame territory, top of the world, almost close enough to reach out and touch that little bit of heaven here on earth. Yeah, Jesus, it's good that we're here so we can have a little rest from down there where the world's kind of hard at times, because up here with you and Moses and Elijah in this moment, it's like the whole world is stopped. Oh, it'd be nice for that to linger a little longer. Yeah, it's good, Jesus, that we're here. Because if you're the Christ who really is God, and you got Moses and Elijah showing up, well, maybe this is the fulfillment of those prophecies of the end of the world. Maybe the new age is beginning, and we're right here at the beginning of it. Maybe they're even going to write books and stories about us because we were the first ones to see the new age come in. Oh, it's good to be here at a time like that. Or maybe the self-talk was a little more godly than that. It's good that we're here, Jesus, so we can serve you and Moses and Elijah, somehow adding those pious religious thoughts to it in order to convince themselves that their desire to just kind of stay there and soak it all in was a little less self-centered than it really was. And then there's this, oh, it's good that we're here, Jesus, because in this moment, with this reality and all this glory of God, it seems that you've left all that silly suffering and death talk behind. This is much better. Right, Jesus, this is the sort of Messiah we're looking for. This is the sort of glory that we're hoping for. This is a vision that we can get into. This is an agenda we can get behind. So how about we make it last? So let's put up 3 tents. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Let's linger here a little longer. Let's make it last as long as we can. We're not really thinking about the other disciples who were there down below. Let's linger here. Let's put up something semi-permanent so you guys can hang out for a while. And maybe we can put a little plaque on there that says, "We were here." And if you happen to hang out for a while with these little shelters, well, maybe we'll put up some little shelters, little tents for ourselves so we can stay and celebrate our part in it too. Interesting that Mark points out how misguided they were. He says Peter, James, and John didn't know what to say. But then I think believers today can get a little misguided too and make faith about power or politics or trying to legislate some utopian heaven on earth atmosphere where everybody falls into line. I mean, just stop and think about that for a moment before moving on in this conversation. How do you see the church today embracing that same sort of heaven on earth ideas that Peter, James, and John were thinking about? And what's problematic about that? Go ahead and hit pause and reflect on that for a few moments. So maybe you can identify with some of the things that are problematic with embracing those heaven on earth ideas. But to me, here's the bigger question. What's the corrective to that? What's the corrective? Because from my perspective, focusing on power and politics in the church can actually lead to all sorts of problems, not the least of which is diverting the church from the true mission of Jesus and pushing people that Jesus came to help and to heal farther and farther away. Now heaven on earth idea, vision might be real appealing to me, especially since, just like the people in Jesus' day, I'm the one who tends to be painting the picture of what I think that heaven on earth should be or should look like. But that's not why Jesus came. Right? Jesus didn't come to set up heaven on earth. Jesus didn't come to set up a utopian society. Jesus didn't come to make our politics pure. Jesus didn't even come to make my life neat and pretty all the time. Jesus came to heal hurting hearts and to forgive sins and to reconnect people with God and to make possible an eternal future that does look like the vision that he's given us here. And so God here redirects our thoughts to that. Again, let's dig into what's written down. Verse 7, then a cloud overshadowed them. A voice came out of the cloud and said, "This is my son whom I love. Listen to him." My first question there is, who's the them? Well, the them there is Jesus and Moses and Elijah. I mean, they're the ones in the cloud. And the cloud there, again, is that picture of the presence of God, that here's heaven on earth. So what it's saying is that Jesus and Moses and Elijah are the participants in that heaven on earth moment, that Peter, James, and John are just the witnesses of that. And here's God's point there. Heaven is real. Right? Heaven is real, and the power and glory and majesty of God and the authority of God is greater than anything else, and you see it. You're glimpsing it. You're a witness of it. You're seeing that heavenly glory, and it's important that you do. It's important that you see it here on earth, because seeing it will help get you through some of the stuff that you're facing in life, especially when life is hard. And that's kind of what happens when we read Bible too. When we read Bible, we get this vision. We see the glory of God. We see a glimpse of what heaven is like. We get a picture of the power and the authority and the glory of God. We get a glimpse of what our future's like. We get to see how awesome that God is, and that both encourages us and it helps us through hard times. But the point is, we're not there yet, right? And that's not what our life is yet. And there is no heaven on earth, all right? And glory, well, it's in our future. Not our present. In fact, the only way you get there to that vision of what they saw up on the mountain is if Jesus does what he came to do, which means he puts a cross before a crown. And so that's why Jesus didn't stay up there on the mountain. I mean, the moment was real, but the moment didn't last. Peter, James, and John looked up, and suddenly all that heavenly stuff was gone. And all they saw was Jesus. And Jesus started heading back down the mountain. I mean, think about what that says about Jesus. I mean, knowing what was ahead, knowing the pain and the suffering that was in store, knowing that he, the eternal God, was going to experience death, Jesus still chose to leave that moment of glory behind. Jesus still chose to head down that mountain and head directly toward Jerusalem and the cross that he knew was coming in the not too distant future. So what Jesus did here is he left glory behind to find a greater glory in rescuing us through his suffering and death on the cross, embracing the cross so that we could one day not only read about his glory, but that we could actually share in his glory. Not just as a vision, but as our reality. Not just as a witness to it, but as a participant in it. Not just for a fleeting moment, but forever. And God doesn't want us to lose sight of that, which is why we hear that voice speak from the cloud to the disciples, to us. This is my son whom I love. Listen to him. Listen to him. Listen to Jesus. That's what the Father wants us to hear. Listen to Jesus because Jesus is God. And not listening to God would be a rather foolish course of action, wouldn't it? So listen to Jesus. Listen to Jesus when he says, do it my way, not your way. Listen to Jesus when he says, choose people over power. Choose service and sacrifice over self-interest. Choose a relationship with me over a you can never quite reach it dream of a heaven on earth existence. Listen to Jesus when he says, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me, which isn't easy. It's just necessary. And that's part of the reason that Jesus gives us a glimpse of his glory here. For the stuff we face now, while we're waiting for the promised future to become our reality. I mean, Peter, James, and John, they certainly needed it for what was coming next, for sorting through all those mind-boggling events of the death and resurrection of Jesus. And after that, for continuing the mission that Jesus had given them of helping other people to find their way up the mountain so they could see the glory of God in the face of Christ. And you know what? When life gets hard and following Jesus is tough and being on mission is challenging, we need to see that too. We need to see that Jesus is God, that Jesus has all power and authority and glory and honor. We need to see that one day, that vision of heaven that we see there, that we'll see his glory too. And we'll see it face to face, and we'll get to bask in the glow, all because Jesus chose not to stay on the mountain, but to head back down to Jerusalem and to give his life for us on a cross. I mean, that's a big part of what this coming Lenten journey is all about. Now, seeing that vision, well, it doesn't make hard things easy. It just makes them bearable and doable.